I want to show you just two more measures of elasticity, and then we're going to wrap up. So the last one that I want to show you, or the next to last one, the first of these last two, is cross-price elasticity of demand. Now, price elasticity of demand, you remember, was the formula or the expression was percentage change in quantity demanded over the percentage change in price. Right now, again, your assessment in this class is now going to be open book, so you don't, you wouldn't have to memorize anything. But you've even under a traditional wrapping up of this class, you wouldn't have to memorize this exactly. There's really just one elasticity formula. There's just variations on it. And the thing that's different when we talk about cross-price elasticity, because price elasticity of demand we already have. What's different when we talk about cross-price elasticity of demand is that we look at two different goods. So this is supposed to be an A. Let me try writing that again a little bit neater. We're going to look at the quantity demanded of good A, and the price of good B. So if the price of B goes up, what happens to sales of A? Do sales of A go up a little bit? Do they go up a lot? Do they go down a little bit? Do they go down a lot? Right? Elasticity describes how big is that change. And then the direction actually tells you something about the goods themselves. So if the price of B goes up 10% and the quantity demanded of good A goes up, let's say 18%, what is the cross-price elasticity of demand? Well, I've got to I'm going to draw my fraction bar here. Right? Price of B goes up 10%. Price of B is in the denominator, so I'm going to put plus 10 down there. And the quantity demanded of A, right, sales of A goes up 18%, so I put plus 18 in the numerator, and I get a positive 1.8. That is the answer to the cross-price elasticity of demand. So what does that tell us? Well, it's much greater than 1, right? So it's fairly elastic. It shows a good bit of sensitivity, right? The sales of A are sensitive to the price of B, and on top of that, it's positive. Remember early on when I told you had to be careful with the negative sign for price elasticity demand, even though it was always going to be negative? Well, this is why. Because in some other measures, like this one, the sign of the answer gives us important information. If you get a positive result, like we did here, so price of B goes up and sales of A go up, what does that tell you about those two goods? It tells you about the nature of those two goods. If the price of Coke goes up, sales of Pepsi go up. Well, that suggests how are those two goods related? Well, they're substitutes. Right? So if the fact that you get a positive sign tells you something about those goods. The magnitude of it, whether it's closer to 0 or 1 or much larger than 1, that tells you about the relative magnitude of the sensitivity. So the bigger the number, the greater the sensitivity, the more elastic it is. The more elastic the cross-price elasticity of demand is. But the other scenario is that if the price of salsa goes up, it's possible that tortilla chip sales go down, right? And that these move in opposite directions. And so if you were to end up with a negative result, that would suggest not that you have complements, or not that you have substitutes, but in fact you have complements. So the sign of your answer is actually really important. The sign helps tell you if you have substitutes or complements. So here I asked you this question. If you were wondering, are iPads and laptops complements or substitutes? I could make an argument either way. Right? I could at least craft an argument that suggests that they're substitutes. I could craft an argument that says that they're complements. What would you need to figure out if you wanted to actually test that? Well, if you could get good data on how the price of one of those is changing, and you could evaluate sales of the other, then you could try to calculate this and come up with some evidence to support one of these theories, that they're complements or that they're substitutes. So that's cross-price elasticity demand. I just want you to be, generally familiar with that and understand what the sign means and how we would interpret it. Here's another one, income elasticity of demand. Right, so this is our last elasticity measure I want to talk about. Remember before we had percentage change in quantity demanded over the percentage change in price. Whoops. Percentage change. But that is price elasticity of demand, right? So that's for price elasticity of demand. And now we're not talking about price elasticity of demand. We're talking about income elasticity of demand. So what are we going to change? Well, we're going to take out the word price, right? And we're going to put in, I like that pink, it really stood out on this black chalkboard, and put in P. No, didn't I just take out the P? Put in I for income. So basically I want to take out the P, okay, because I got rid of price elasticity of demand, and now I have income elasticity of demand. So I want to know, how does the quantity of the goods sold vary with income? So it works basically the same way. If someone's income goes up by 10% and the quantity demanded goes up by 3%, what's the income elasticity of demand? Well, it's going to be, right, plus 10 in the denominator, plus 3 in the numerator. That gives me a positive 0.3. On the other hand, let's change colors and do a different example. If income goes up by 10% and the quantity demanded goes up by 12%, what is the income elasticity of demand? Well, if here we said income goes up by 10, quantity demanded goes up by 12, then you have a positive 1.2. So here, this shows much more sensitivity, right? This is a more elastic measure of income elasticity of demand. Up here, this is less elastic, right? This would be technically classified as inelastic income elasticity of demand. But notice in both of these examples, they were positive. What if, get rid of this one. Oh, I have a lot left here that I missed. Okay, there we go. Let's switch the color again. What if I told you income goes up by 10% and sales of something go down by 8%? Now what's the income elasticity of demand? Well, I've got a plus 10 in the denominator and I've got a minus 8 in the numerator, so I get minus 0.8. So now I've got still something closer to 1. Absolute value is closer to 1, but it's negative. So what does that mean? Here, this is another example where different signs give you important information about it. So here's my example up on the side. If income goes up by 10% and sales of Jersey Shore Season 1 go down by 14%, what does that tell you about the show? Well, you can calculate income elasticity of demand, right? We say income went up by 10%. Sales of Jersey Shore Season 1 go down by 14%, so you get a minus 1.4. So it's fairly sensitive to income, right? That's a larger-ish answer in terms of absolute value, but it's also negative. And what does the negative sign tell you? Income goes up and you buy less of it. What kind of good is that? That suggests to you that Jersey Shore is an inferior good. But maybe you already knew that, right? But basically, we have this same scenario where the sign gives us information. If you see a positive sign in your result, that suggests that you're looking at a normal good. And if you see a minus sign, that is when income goes up, people buy less of it, or as income goes down, people buy more of it, that would suggest that you're looking at an inferior good. So again, the sign is really important. So it's always important to keep track of that sign as you are calculating your answer. So there you go. That is our last measure of elasticity. The last thing I want to do is just a quick example of interpretation, because the most important thing is that you know, what does this mean? So this is a chart that I shamelessly pulled out of a different textbook, not the one that we're using for class. Why don't you, if ideally, you would pause this right here, look down through this column over here and read what it is, and then you can, think about what they mean. What is it? What does that tell you about the good? So ideally, pause it, look through them on your own, and then come back and we'll answer them. I'm just going to charge right through because this is the last thing we've got here. Price elasticity of demand for beer, minus 0.23. What does that tell us? Well, price elasticity of demand is negative. That doesn't say too much. It should always be negative. The fact that it is the absolute value is just 0.23, that's actually pretty small. That would suggest that demand for beer is inelastic, right? That as the price goes up, people consume less, but not that much less, right? That's not super sensitive to price. Now the second one, cross price elasticity of demand between beer and wine, 0.31. So what's the two things we can take from this? One is the sign, it's positive. What does the fact that it's positive tell us? Positive cross-price elasticity demand suggests that they are substitutes, so that people's consumption habits, like the data surrounding their purchasing of it, suggests that they are, in fact, substitutes. But they're not perfect substitutes, right? It's not a one-to-one trade-off. It's a positive 0.31, but we can see from that people treat beer and wine as substitutes. Now, what about a cross-price elasticity of demand between beer and spirits, that is liquor? Also positive, right? So we also know that they're substitutes, but are beer and liquor, beer and spirits, are they as close a substitute as beer and wine? At least how do consumers treat them? It's still positive, but the absolute value is much smaller, right? So people treat beer and wine as substitutes to sort of twice as much as beer and liquor, right? They're twice as good as in terms of being substitutes. So that's what we can take from that. The fact that it's positive suggests that they're substitutes, but the difference in values and in the magnitude of it suggests how much of a substitute. All right, income elasticity of demand for beer, minus 0.09. So what does the minus sign tell us? Well, if income elasticity of demand negative, that actually suggests that it is an inferior good, right? That people treat beer as an inferior good, except, that's true, but it's minus 0.09. Is that a very big absolute value? Well, no, it's actually pretty close to zero. It almost looks like as people's income changes, their consumption of beer does not change very much at all. And imagine our collection of data and our access to data is not perfect. Can you imagine a different study that actually got some data that suggested that beer was a normal good because it got a value of positive 0.07, right, or positive 0.03 or something like that? So notice that it is negative, which suggests it's inferior, but also notice that it's very small. So we're not going to put a lot of stock in that. On the other hand, income elasticity of demand for wine is a positive 5.03. So that shows that people's consumption of wine is very dependent on income, right? So that's a normal good. Technically, whenever it's if it's positive and larger than 1, people also call it a luxury good. So I don't get too much into that. I'm not going to worry about that. But notice that something as large as 5, not only is it a normal good, it would be considered a luxury good. And the income elasticity of demand for spirits, 1.21, that would also suggest that it is a normal good. So there you go. That's how you might interpret, some of those values. That's what it means. There you go. That wraps up the section on elasticity. The last things I'd like you to do are to look at those other really fascinating examples about, one is about the slave trade, and one is about something else that's escaping me off the top of my head. But excellent examples in those Marginal Revolution University videos. Check those out, and then follow up if you have